And we're here today for a lunch and learn, for CARW's Lunch and Learn, how industrial real estate is leading sustainable development. Today's lunch and learn, as all of our lunch and learns this year, is sponsored by Landmark Credit Union. So this session will go from noon to 1 p.m. We'll leave about 15 minutes for question and answer. Our lunch and learns, as you are probably aware, cover a wide variety of topics, highlight member companies, and again, a variety of different topics and industries. So if you have any ideas, please bring them to us. We're happy to showcase and grateful for all of your participation. Couple rules for today's program. All attendees are muted. And video is disabled. If you have a question, and we encourage you to ask questions throughout the program, I will be moderating today's session that we have planned out for you today. Use either the chat function or the question and answer button, or you can send me a text message as well, and we will make sure that we get those questions answered. Again, we're grateful for today's presenting sponsor, Landmark Credit Union, as well as all of the 2021 CARW annual sponsors listed here. Just a quick preview of the events and the sessions that we have coming up. We're starting to have a little bit more flexibility to gather outside now that there is a vaccine out and available, yet we are still taking every single precaution that we can. We do have an outdoor March Madness event coming up this Friday at the Exporium. A number of lunch and learns coming up here in the next few weeks, and we're really excited about that, as well as a few really special in-person tours that will be moderated and in a small group setting. We also want to invite you to the May 12th. It's a one-year look back, but then really the exciting part is the 10 years forward. We have a futurist who is going to be with us, as well as a local reaction panel. So that will be probably our final virtual event. And then we'll have an in-person outdoor happy hour as well. And then also our CARW golf outing, mark the date for August 16th. This will be our first commercial real estate foundation event. So we're very excited about that. Today's speakers are Sam Dunaiski with Renewable Energy, Zach Hill with Alliant Energy, Ken Maly with Newmark, and then of course we wanted to list Coleman Pfeiffer here from Alliant Energy, who helped coordinate today's program. All of their contact information will be available on the slides as they are presented after the program. So we're going to get started. Commercial and industrial companies are increasing their focus on energy generation and their carbon footprint. For example, we've all heard about Amazon recently announcing their goal of reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2040, which is only a few short decades away. And so there's a lot of discussion about renewable energy, and a lot of discussion not only nationally, but here in Wisconsin. So we have assembled, or Coleman Pfeiffer with Alliant Energy has helped assemble a really fantastic panel to help give us a baseline of what this means for commercial real estate. And then we'll go through a number of questions to help you engage and understand the benefits for your business. So we are going to begin with slides. We've got about 10 minutes of slides from our panelists, and then I've got a number of questions, and we encourage you to ask specific or broad questions of all of our panelists. So Sam, start us off here. What are some of the trends in renewable energy?
Yeah, so I think in order to really know the trends, we need to know the landscape. So I'm going to try to best lay out our renewable energy landscape here as succinctly as I can in the next few minutes. And to know our trends, we have to know a starting point, of course, right? My family used to always take road trips as a kid, and my dad used to always say, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you are to start out with, right? So that's what we're going to do. Is we're going to start out with where we're at. We're going to show where we're going, and then hopefully how we get there. Coincidentally, my dad is the gentleman on that tractor right there. So this is a photograph of my parents' solar array, which is outside of Duluth, Minnesota. And I love to start this every talk out because it really shows, if this can work in northern Minnesota, it can work anywhere. So Zach, Zach and Ken, I'm going to email you this photo so we can use it later on. But let's go to the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about where we're at. So this is a slide from a New York Times article a few months ago, which shows how Wisconsin has made its electricity over the last 20 years or so. And as you can see, the vast majority of the electricity generation on this slide comes from fossil fuel sources, mostly from coal, some from natural gas too, and a little from petroleum as well. And this is problematic for many different reasons, not just for environmental reasons, but if you look around, you'll notice Wisconsin, we don't have any coal mines, we don't have any oil shales, we don't have any natural gas reserves. So that represents billions of dollars, billions every single year that leave our state to go to states like Wyoming and West Virginia and other places that have those resources because we need to import them in order to make electricity. And that just made bad business sense. But as you look, we have a long way to go. We have a lot of coal still in our mix, anywhere from 40 to 48%. About 27 to 34% is composed of natural gas, and about 16% is nuclear, which leaves only about 9 to 10% of the rest of our electricity generation to come from renewables. And most of that is actually non-Wisconsin sources of wind and hydropower. I don't know if you can tell, but at the very end of that slide, there's a small speck of yellow, and that represents solar. We're only at about 1% solar right now. So we have a long, long way to go. But here's where we're going, and that's on the next slide. This slide shows almost all of Wisconsin's major electric utilities, and it also shows their number of customers as well as their current renewables mix and stated goals for the future. So you can see that a lot of our utilities here in Wisconsin, both our investor-owned and our municipals and our co-ops, have some pretty ambitious goals. Many of them have 100% carbon reductions by around 2050. Some are even more aggressive than that, which is really great to see. It's really great to see where we're going, and goals are very important. But as we saw from that previous slide, there is certainly a long way to go. So there's a lot of work cut out for them. I'd like to show more of it, leave this slide up a little more for you to digest it, but I think we should move on to the next slide. And that is, that was where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. And I have a pretty good idea that Ken and Zach are both going to talk about costs a little bit, but cost is probably the main reason why we're having this conversation today. It's certainly the main reason why I'm here today. I can guarantee you if wind and solar were still more expensive than typical generation sources, we would not be having this conversation right now. But wind and solar have fallen dramatically over the last decade or so. Wind is down almost 70%. Solar is down 75% to 90%, depending on the type of installation. Privately owned solar arrays are probably closer to about 75%, but utility scale prices are down 85 to close to 90%. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about costs later on in the conversation when we talk about, like I said, private and behind the meter installations for businesses later. But I just really want to emphasize that costs have completely changed our conversation. And it's not just good for the environment. This is not greenwashing right here. This is good for business, it's good for customers, it's good for society as a whole. So I just really want to emphasize the fact that these types of resources have just fallen dramatically. And if you look at the top of the page, you'll notice this is unsubsidized, not subsidized. So people like to talk about, the only reason wind and solar are around is because there's big government subsidies. Even when you take those out, you can see that's not the case. So this is not the main part of how we get there, but it's certainly a very critical role. The next slide, which is my last one, kind of details a little bit more the practical ways of how we get to a 100% renewably powered society. So this is a map of projects, utility scale projects that are in what we call the MISO queue, which is our Midwest grid, if you will. It stands for Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. So these are all projects that are hopefully, they're not guaranteed, but hopefully will be going on to the queue and adding more resources to our mix. So as you can see, we have a pretty small amount of wind and solar right now. only about 280 megawatts. If we go up to hopefully this projected value of 6,500 megawatts, we're going to get to, and incorporating that with wind as well, we're going to get to hopefully about 33% renewable energy, which, you know, still on the surface is not a lot, but it's going to be a big step up from where we're at now. And, you know, again, this is all utility scale projects. We're going to talk about business in a little bit too, but this is going to be a big slice of the pie moving forward. So thanks for having me, and I'm going to turn it over now to, I think it's Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. An excellent overview of the current landscape, and I'll hit on a couple of those themes here in my slides as well. But thanks for inviting me to join you guys for your lunch and learn today. If you want to go to the next slide, Tracy, I'll just kind of give you a broad overview. Alliant Energy has been in the news a lot in regards to some of those goals that Sam shared in our little table there. But a lot of plans to announce over the last year to close down older coal plants in our generation fleet and to add more renewables. We've added about 1.5 gigawatts of new wind energy over the last 6 years. And now it's definitely solar's turn. Next slide, Tracy. So back in 2019, we created what we called the Clean Energy Blueprint, and this called for about 1 gigawatt of new solar energy to be added to our generation fleet over the next 3 years. And as a part of that Clean Energy Blueprint, we've been actively working behind the scenes to find a number of projects that met our criteria that we would acquire or self-develop. And we've announced about 12 of those projects, well, about 8 of those 12 projects that we hope to add by the end of 2024. So we always try to think about what exactly, how much is 1 gigawatt of new solar energy? Well, it is about enough power to heat and cool about 250,000 Wisconsin homes and businesses. As a part of our Clean Energy Blueprint, it's not all huge projects, you know, 50, 100 megawatts or 150 megawatts of projects. They're also smaller, local distribution connected projects or customer projects too. Those are just as important to us as well. Next slide, Tracy. It's always hard to imagine, okay, so 250,000 new homes powered by all the solar coming in. How much land does that take up? I always just think it's helpful to kind of show a visual here. It's roughly about half of Lake Mendota. Those of you who are familiar with the Madison area, for every megawatt of new solar, you need about 5 acres of land. So just to give you a little sense there of how big, how much land that's going to take up, because I know that is important to a lot of the realtor groups that I've spoken with in the past. So just a little level setting there. Next slide, Tracy. So this is just another map similar to the one that Sam showed, showing all those solar projects in the current MISO queue that's being studied. And only a fraction of these will probably go forward for one reason or another. But I think the real question is why Wisconsin? Why here? And I think if you go to the next slide, it really starts with that slide that Sam put up, that solar costs are declining, and over the last 10 years, between 85 to 90%, we've just seen that cost come down. There's probably a limit to how much more that can go down from where it is today, but panels are getting more efficient, technology is getting better. And of course, the way that we're implementing or building some of these solar facilities, those are really where we're seeing some of the cost drivers and the cost savings going forward. So that's really the driver number one of why we're seeing so much solar here in Wisconsin. It is good for business. It's good for our customers, largely because of costs. But really the second driver on the next slide, Tracy, is because there's growing corporate interest. A lot of our customers want us to be adding more renewables to our generation fleet. We're seeing a variety of reasons why our customers want more renewables, either from us or from investing in them directly. Some of them need what's called renewable energy credits that they need to offset their carbon emissions, either please investors or meet some of their corporate sustainability goals. Some businesses are making this push towards more renewables because of the PR and marketing, to be honest. Some also are looking at it as a way to save on their monthly electricity bills, or to have greater energy cost certainty over the next 10, 15, 20 years in the event that they're worried about utility rates increasing, which we try not to do or limit. And then some are just investing in renewables or want us to do more because it's a value to them. It's really meaningful. That's what they want to do. So there's just a variety of reasons why we're seeing this growing corporate interest, and we'll talk more about that later. Next slide, please, Tracy. This is a terrible graphic here, but this is just the amount of growing corporate renewable deals that were done in 2020, even despite COVID. So over 10 gigawatts of new renewable deals were made between corporate companies and corporations and renewable developers. So, and we continue to see more and more deals being done. And if you go to the next slide, try to zoom in a little bit. These aren't the mom and pop companies either. These are the Amazons, the Nestle's, the General Motors, Facebook, Starbucks, Target, you name it. So we have a lot of these in our companies in our service territories between Wisconsin and Iowa. And we'd rather be doing energy deals or renewable deals with our customers rather than other developers doing it. So we're trying to respond to that growing corporate interest. If you go to the next slide, so we do have a number of different products we now have at Alliant Energy that we can offer our customers, and I won't go into the details here, but we knowing that every customer is different, what their sustainability goals are different, how they want to achieve them, what their financial thresholds are, paybacks are. We've got hopefully a renewable solution that can help achieve their goals and ours. So this has been a big change for us over the last year or two to have some new products and tariffs rather than maybe the old approach where we just provided reliable, affordable power, and that was it. Customers just had to be happy with that. Now we've got many more tools in our toolbox to help give customers what they want and what the objectives are. I think I've just got one or two more slides here. There are several misconceptions about renewables in general and solar. I won't get into all these, but happy to maybe talk more about them in the Q&A. There's some public opposition to wind. Obviously, wind gets a lot of the abuse, I guess, in the public forum, but there's no shortage of misconceptions about solar. Obviously, a lot of attention recently on what happened in Texas, but really not a lot of similarities between our two states. But as I talk to landowners that we're doing leases with for new big solar projects, or I'll talk to customers about renewable projects, there's a lot of concerns about what we're going to do with the commissioning of the projects, making sure we recycle the equipment. There's concerns about how solar impact their vistas or views. They're concerned about noise, even though solar there's not many moving parts. So just a variety of different concerns about solar that happy to talk about in more detail later. But it's not a slam dunk, I think, overall, is my point with this slide. There's still a lot of things that we have to address when we install the solar over the next several years. And then I think that was the bulk of my slides. So with that, I'll turn it over to one of our customers that cares about renewables, Ken.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you for having us, Tracy and Coleman. Yes, I'm with Newmark. We have offices in Madison and Milwaukee. You probably know the name, but I am with the Global Corporate Services Group. So I kind of float over national and global site selection. So I'm a corporate site selection consultant. So I've done a lot more projects outside of Wisconsin than in. But so our perspective is that more and more over the last 5 to 10 years, more and more of our projects are having us pick locations, pick utility service areas, pick states, and even sites where they can source renewables. And I have one slide here. Do you have that up, Tracy? There we go. So these are some of our, this is just a slide out of one of our corporate presentation decks where we're educating clients. We work for a lot of European or Asian clients that are trying to figure out where to go in the United States. If those clients are, say, in the supply chain of electric vehicles, and that could be the battery makers or the ones that are making the different chemicals to go into the batteries, or aluminum or copper to go into the batteries, or even a chrome plater, if they're in the EV supply chain, that's just one instance. They need to prove their power supply is renewable. So, but it's not just them. Data centers we do a lot of work with, they have corporate mandates to reduce their carbon footprint. And then it goes all the way down the line to the large list that Zach showed of customers. More and more often right now, this is becoming a site selection criteria in our models that it just didn't exist 5 years ago. It's coming more and more to the forefront. So, on the left map, you can see the wide landscape of renewables that are available throughout the United States. Really, those things cluster depend on the climate, the resources that are there, but also state mandates and state incentives that have caused the booms in different renewables. But the important thing we tell them is that, don't worry about the generation source, as kind of Zach and Sam will get into later. We can source these throughout the MISO region, a lot of times throughout the United States through purchase power agreements and buying different credits. So that is not really a site selection criteria, because a lot of our clients don't really need it, co-located with their facility. They don't need the same electrons. They just need to offset their carbon footprint somehow. And there's a lot of different tools that we'll get into later about how to do that. So specific projects, large data centers, large factories, we often have to specifically source renewables for that facility. If it's 20 megawatts or 100 megawatts or even 300 megawatts or more, a lot of times we're looking for a specific mechanism to source renewables that will drive that facility. Smaller users, though, say that have a more distributed office footprint, they're oftentimes looking at the middle map of just what is the base generation or renewable mix of the utility. So a lot of times we'll be scoring states or utilities against each other based on what percentage of their renewables or power comes from renewables, right? And that, the large projects maybe would create their own specific rate and develop a custom solution, whereas the smaller ones just look at how well you're doing now, and it may be a site selection criteria. So the Southeast, much behind a lot of the country. Wisconsin's kind of middle of the pack. And then you can see those northern states with all the great access to hydro that are ahead of the pack. And then finally, deregulated versus regulated. Wisconsin being a regulated state, we have to work within, when working with IOUs like Alliant Energy, we have to work within the confines of the PSC. So we'll get into this a little bit more later as well. What are the mechanisms that you can use working with a PSC to, say, source renewable energy for a specific project? So that it can become a little more complicated in a regulated state. It's easier in a deregulated, but as kind of Texas has shown, bringing up Texas again, they've shown kind of the downfalls of what deregulation can cause with the riskiness. So we can get into that more later, but just wanted to get across that this is more and more of a criteria for our projects, and each one's different. Some projects are fine with the REC certificates that show they've offset their carbon footprint. Others want to point to a specific solar field. They call it new to the world. We want new to the world renewables, and they want to point to a specific wind farm or solar project that they've contracted with and caused to come into existence. So it kind of runs the gamut, and some clients have different preferences. They'll say, well, how was that hydro created? Was it created environmentally sensitively? Was there any power used to pump water into a reservoir? Or some locations, some clients may consider nuclear in the mix, but so it's a wide range. It's always different, but energy's become a topic and something we're studying more and more often in corporate site selection. Turn it back to you, Tracy.
All right, thank you so much. I think that was flawlessly executed, and I think it sets us up real nicely for the questions that we've discussed previously. And again, a quick reminder to use the chat function if you have questions. I will help kind of field those because some of those are already being asked. I will say too that this presentation and the slides will be shared following the presentation, because I know there was a lot of very specific information and some really good maps that were shared. So we're going to start with the first question, and it's going to go to Zach, and I think Ken could probably weigh in as well, about renewable energy being good business. You did touch on that. One thing that I noticed is you talked about a lot of multi-state companies that have locations in a number of states, some regulated, some deregulated. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and then maybe touch on the opportunities for companies that may be just based here in Wisconsin, and even speak to the inquiries that you're getting on that? So let's start with Zach.
Yeah, sure. Sustainability is good for business for us. Obviously, we wouldn't be taking a lot of those steps that I mentioned before and setting some of those aggressive goals. For us, it is about taking more ownership of our energy future. Sam talked about we don't own the mine mouths, we don't own a lot of the gas facilities. With solar and wind, these are homegrown resources, and for us, the costs are coming down. But it's as we look longer term, it's a way that, and I think a lot of companies look at this too. You take out those variable fuel costs in your future, and you don't have to worry about the prices fluctuating in the market long term. I always compare it to like buying a car. You'd probably pay a little bit more for a car now if you didn't have to ever put gas in it. And that's really how we view renewables and why they can be strong for economic development on our company. It's sun's out, wind's blowing, it's free fuel, and we can talk about some of the challenges. Want to be too over reliant. But I think that kind of calculus, getting rid of those variable costs, more control over your energy future is why we're doing it, why we see some of those corporations looking at renewable deals here in Wisconsin, but also across the U.S. as well. So that'd be just some quick thoughts there.
Yeah, let me just kind of back up what Zach said. When we are trying to compare locations to each other, we're usually building out a 12, 15-year NPV cost model on all of their costs to operate the business. So, and then we're trying to project an escalation of those over the life of the project. So, labor costs, how's that going to go up? How are property taxes going to go up? When we look at an area that's heavily coal-based, we have to assume that is eventually going to be phased out. Right, so there could be regulations in a future administration that could come and hit those assets, right? And then all of a sudden, they need to scramble to come up with new generation, and then they're going to have to pass those costs of new investment along to the rates in the beginning of that investment, right? So that's one risk when we look at coal areas. The other risk, like Zach said, when we look at natural gas areas, is that's going to fluctuate with the market. So. If you're when we're doing a long-term cost model, and if power is one of the major inputs of the business, which more and more these days it is, with the trend in automation, they've really increased power usage for facilities and decreased labor usage. So power is becoming a larger and larger piece of the pie for operating costs, and the areas with the largest percentage of kind of renewables already built. And we know the long-term sustainability, we kind of escalate the lowest risk of price increases in the power costs.
So are you getting inquiries from new development in Wisconsin? If you could speak to that, or again, is this just the multi-state users that you're seeing this right now? And I know that Sam is going to share a couple of points, and we can share the link too, about the number of companies that are already making this commitment for renewable energy.
Yeah, I think almost a quarter of the Fortune 500 companies now have some level of this climate commitment, and we do get a lot of inquiries from our existing customers about renewables, much more than we were getting 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe because we've got more products so we can offer them, but it's also starting to be a big differentiator. I know there's a couple customers that we have that's trying to pick between moving operations into co-op service territory, for example, versus ours. And rates are about the same, but we can provide more renewable options, for example. And it's not going to be always make the difference, I think, in every situation, but it is starting to move the needle a little bit. It's just another value add that we provide. But it's definitely the request that we hear from existing and potential customers skyrocketed over the last couple of years.
Sam, what are you noting?
Yeah, it's really important to show that, not only are companies going to the utilities for these, but they're taking it on their own as well. There was a business here in Madison that I helped with, and they made manufacturing parts. So, it's a manufacturing facility, uses a lot of electricity. And they put I think it was 130 kilowatt solar array on their roof, which offsets, I think, about 52% of their usage. They're going to pay it off in less than 4 years between tax credits, between state incentives, between accelerated depreciation. And, they're a big user, and also depending on the time that they are, operating their facility, that payback can be even faster. So, but not every business can do that. And I think it's really important that we remember that, there's not a one size fits all solution here for every business, even in Wisconsin.
Zach, I have a question that was a little unscripted, but we did talk about labor. Can you speak to what the labor input is for creation of renewable energy, whether it's the production of solar panels or wind or anything that goes into the preparation? What's kind of the offset there?
Well, we get a lot of construction jobs when we get a projects approved. There's a significant amount of new work that will be needed, and over the next couple of years, I'll say that's one of the risks. We're adding a lot of new solar. I know mentioned the 1 gigawatt, but We Energies is plans to also build a lot of new solar. MG&E, Excel as well. So labor could be in short supply, and that's one of the risks that we look at, which is great because a lot of potential jobs, but it's also a risk, I think, here in the near term that we'll have enough labor to build all these. But as far as the equipment, a lot of the panels are made overseas, other countries. I think there's only one U.S. manufacturer of solar panels, and that's First Solar. Now there's some other companies, foreign companies, that are actually assemble modules and other equipment here. So we are going to be reliant on some foreign-made panels, and that's an emerging trend. I think people will care more and more about where solar panels and other equipment's made, particularly coming from China. But overall, a lot of job potential though too on the labor front. I don't know if that got to all your heart of your question there, Tracy.
No, that's great, because there's always an offset, right? Especially as we go to automation, which I think was a really good point, a fascinating point, and one that we talk about a lot here. Ken, can you speak to any of the sectors that may be more amenable to looking at renewable energy solutions, whether it's distribution, manufacturing? What are you seeing on the retail side? What are clients saying?
Yeah, well, a lot of it depends on the final product that's being created, right? So if it's an electric vehicle, or if it's going to be an electric boat, or anything, a windmill, something like that, anything like that is in the green energy kind of manufacturing process, a lot of those final producers like General Motors or Volvo will pass down the chain that we need your energy certificates or RECs or proof of renewable energy all throughout the supply chain. So it can be manufacturing, and it kind of hits, it depends on the final product a lot of times. The other thing is that it depends on the location of the headquarters, right? So a lot of California-based companies are kind of pushing this more than others. A lot of European companies, clients that we have, have more of these mandates. A lot of those mandates, those corporate mandates, a lot of times they're driven by their employees, and a lot of times that kind of comes out of where the headquarters is located. So it's kind of hard to put it into a specific industry. It's more like, what locations are they headquartered, and what product are they producing? It's kind of it's hitting all sectors based on those factors.
Zach, did you have something to add on that?
No, I think you did a great job on that.
So to that point, I mean, and that was interesting when you talked about California, because as we have read in the headlines, whether it was planned pre-pandemic or not, there are lots of companies that are looking at other options for site selection or for their corporate headquarters or for their relocation. Can you maybe speak to the Midwest? So Wisconsin relative to the Midwest, and this was a question that came in. Is there anything about Wisconsin that puts it at a competitive advantage one way or another? Or if we're not at that advantage yet, is there something that we can be doing?
Well, I think we can kind of get into the regulated versus deregulated. The one issue, Wisconsin doesn't really have a disadvantage except for relatively high power costs right now, right? Compared to other states, they're relatively high right now. And I think that these type of solutions can help bring it down and stabilize it. So overall cost puts it at a little bit of a disadvantage. I would say the being a regulated state, if you wanted to say, I want to have this factory or this data center powered by 100% renewables, you kind of have to create a custom rate, or you have to package something. And well, Zach can probably tell us better the solutions you can do it. But if you were, say, in Texas, you're automatically on the open market, and you can just put out in that open market, you can just put out a request for a bid, give me 300 megawatts of wind power created by this wind turbine, and you'll get bidders on it, right? Here it's a little different. You have to work with the utilities. You have to set up the system, and then you have to, in some cases, you may have to go to the PSC to get them to adopt the special rate for this specific project. So each state is kind of tackling this different, right? Utah just passed a system. They're also regulated similar to Wisconsin. They passed a kind of a pass-through that said, hey, we'll just tag on these admin fees and this profit percentage, but then we'll go out and source whatever renewables you want, and we'll just pass it through this system, and we don't have to go back to the PSC. And we've already kind of laid some of that groundwork. So there's a lot of that's the main thing that we look at. It's not really, I don't think Wisconsin's any different than any other state in the Midwest who, in most cases we have a little bit higher power costs for some reason. But it's mainly the regulation mechanism, and then how progressive are the specific utilities. So, having worked with Alliant a lot, them, for instance, I know that I can come to them and they'll come up with a solution to solve it. Not that familiar with the other utilities around the state, but that is one thing that a lot of times we consider when we're looking at a location. We call the utility, we throw these questions out to them, and sometimes they're just not willing to put together the answer. They've never done it. They don't have any experience with it. That is something that gets a location eliminated oftentimes these days.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'm recalling the slide. I believe, Zach, you had it where you were showing all of the different utilities and kind of their commitment and their status on renewable energy. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I think one thing that could be intimidating, especially for folks on the call, there's a spectrum of familiarity, right? I mean, to some people, this is brand new information. Others have dealt with clients who are asking for it. And, what's that connection point and how you work with the clients or the site selector or the individual business, and maybe address Ken's point as well.
Sure. That was Sam's good slide, so he gets credit for that one. But I'll tell you, top of the list for us, and trying to attract new businesses and keep the ones we have. We just got to keep rates affordable. And that's priority number one for us. And I know Wisconsin overall is a little high now compared to maybe some of our peers surrounding states. But that's a priority number one for Alliant Energy, is keeping our rates low. You don't have that, it's hard to kind of get in the room and with potential customers. So, and then there's just an expectation that you're going to provide reliable power now. Our lights are on over 99% of the time. Plants are running, and so you have to balance, affordability, reliability, but with our renewable options, the great thing is, I think that it is going to be a differentiator for us, is this pipeline of projects, large ones and small ones, and good developers in the state actually, is that we're going to be able to work with our customers more closely on projects, because we've got a lot of supply that we can tap into and get the best ones that meet their needs at the price points that they want. And the utilities like Alliant and We Energies has a lot of the similar tariffs, and so does MG&E. We're able to kind of combine, match the customer with those resources more easily as a utility provider. I think that's just going to be a huge differentiator that, Governor Walker did a great job on job creation. I won't interject politics here, but didn't really tell kind of where we were going, because I don't think it was quite on the radar screen yet. But I think the sustainability option could be really great for the Evers administration, and how we track new businesses with these different tools and pipeline of projects there. So that's cool.
Yeah, and the reliability aspect is going to become a lot larger after what we saw happen in Texas, right? So whereas maybe you could get low-cost renewables pretty easy on the open marketplace, that type of system does not give them the kind of profit margin to invest in the overall system and do some of the things that they needed to do, right? So that I think is making the reliability and factors that Wisconsin's going to be much better at. It's bringing it more to the forefront. So
yeah, all our solar and wind have cold weather operating packages. In Texas, you didn't see that because it's a competitive state. That's added dollars they have to spend. We are regulated. We have to make sure we provide reliable service. So that's a huge difference.
No, that's great. So we're going to jump back over to Sam, and again, you deserve credit for that slide. That one stood out to me. talk about the areas of renewable energy that have the most potential. And I know we're going to get into the future later down the road, but could you also speak to hydropower? It was a question that came up and we didn't really talk about it, especially in Wisconsin where we have so many great waterways.
Yeah, I saw that. And honestly, right now, when we're talking about in-state renewables, actually hydropower makes up the largest mix of those renewables. But, you know, hydro is limited in the fact that we can only put it in so many places, right? There's only so many rivers, so many reservoirs. I know there is some concern with, you know, environmental damage. I don't know, I can't speak to the you know, actual specifics of what those are, but I know it's not super easy to cite as easy as some of these other technologies are. You know, battery storage there's a huge potential for that because, you know, it's true, the wind does not blow all the time, the sun does not shine all the time, but in terms of what's around right now, solar, I think definitely has the most potential. It is by far the most scalable. You know, we see everything from you know, utilities having basically solar power plants, all the way down to those, you know, little guys you stick on your car that have a little solar collector and they dance around. So like solar is just so scalable and it's just so affordable now. I mean, it's easy to install. There's virtually no maintenance you have to do. So I would say solar definitely has the most potential, even in a state like Wisconsin. And also another thing I wanted to mention too, another question that came in is, you know, I think we need to also reinvest a little bit more in biofuels and our biofuel infrastructure. In case you haven't looked around, there's a lot of cows in Wisconsin, and we can definitely take, you know, take that resource and put those biofuels into the pipeline. We can do things like renewable natural gas, which can either be used to make electricity or it can be used to power, you know, to fuel, I should say, larger trucks and things like that that can't necessarily run on electric yet. So I think that is one area of potential that's Wisconsin specific that we could really be taking advantage of.
No, I love that, the resourcefulness. Just look around you, right? So we're going to go around the horn and ask a question about those misconceptions and those myths. I know that it was touched on in the opening remarks, but if we could maybe start with Zach and talk about some of the most common myths that you're running into in your area.
Sure, I hit on a few of them, but I think one of the things to keep in mind too is that renewables don't have a cost. Most of them do, and I know Sam brought up the one, well, they all have a cost. And Sam brought up the payback on, I think, a 130 kW system. And I think every customer is different. That payback's going to always be different, and the usage, but you know, you have to, you really have to dig into the details sometimes when you're looking at maybe a private generation opportunities, solar on your rooftop, for example. The devil's always in the details. You have to really vet the person who's providing you the proposal. Sometimes all those developers aren't created the same. We work with a lot of great ones, but you have to look at the quality of the systems that they may put on your roof, and are they going to be around in 5-10 years? So I think there's always a cost, and a lot of our customers don't think there is. And the devil a lot of times in the details. And we are always willing, when our customers are looking at self-generation or renewables, they're going to invest in themselves. We're always willing to help them kind of go through and look at the pros and cons of proposals and talk through really what it means for their bill. So I think that's just little words of caution, I guess. So green isn't always free.
Well, and I mean, what we're outlining here is, you know, a very complex kind of system to work through, whether it's a new project or you know, an existing project, kind of contemplating these, you know, making these considerations. Ken, how about you? What are some of the myths or misconceptions that you're running into as you're talking to clients?
Well, you know, oftentimes in the last couple of years, I guess they were pleasantly surprised how little it costs. Actually, I mean, you know, if you go to the utility, we start there first and say, okay, we need 100 megawatts at 72% load factor. And they'll give us a cost, and we'll say how much to change this to 100% renewable. And I'm just surprised that the costs are, you know, under 5%. You know, sometimes 1-2%. It's not a really big cost. Now, if everyone tried to do that at once, we'd probably have a problem with supply, right? But really, like on a typical project, they're pleasantly surprised with the cost. And now, I gotta say, what we're talking about is going to the utility and saying, offset this somewhere on the grid. We're not talking about put solar panels on my site, right? Our clients, that's truly not what they're looking for. Typically, they don't want to waste the acreage on solar panels. They'd rather have the utility put it somewhere where that is not served by water and sewer. They also probably don't want it on their roof, because then they have to learn how to maintain these systems, or they have to partner with someone who they have to give access to their property and their building to maintain them, right? So typically it's not, I'm not talking on site. I'm sure that gets a lot more costly, but just going to the utility and asking them to turn your power source into 100% renewable, do it wherever you can do it most efficiently. Maybe it's in North Dakota, that's fine. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting one, because I think for some, you might be thinking, okay, we're going to install solar panels. And that's more of, I would say, what I see on the residential side. You hear people talking about that a lot. But Sam, how about you? Any of the myths or misconceptions?
I mean, I work for a renewable energy advocacy organization. I go out into the community. I've heard them all. So, but and not to pile on, but I think cost is still one of the biggest misconceptions. I talk with architecture and design firms, and they say, oh yeah, we looked into solar 5 years ago. And I said, well, there's actually a big difference in price now than there was 5 years ago. And Ken and Zach both make good points. It's doing solar on site is definitely, it's not free, as much as the costs have come down. But I do think that, privately owned solar does, or renewable sources or resources or whatever, they do promise some of the biggest paybacks too, because, and Ken talked about this, Wisconsin does have high electricity rates. And if you're offsetting those high electricity rates, that frees up a lot of your income for other, resources and things like that. So I completely agree with both of them. I think, honestly, the cost and the price is still the biggest misconception about renewables right now.
So myths and misconceptions. Let's talk about challenges and opportunities. And I kind of want to go around the horn, because each of you kind of represents a leg in the stool here of the entire process. So let's start with Ken about challenges and opportunities that you see for renewable energy as you're talking to clients.
I think it's the supply, the supply keeping up with the demand, and this is more Sam's area than me. But I just know that as we put down projects, and if they're 100 megawatts, some of them are 300 megawatts a piece, if all of them are asking for renewable energy, that's going to be tough to fill that demand, especially if it's not that marginally more expensive than your regular power source. If a lot of customers start converting, I guess I'd be worried if we could keep up with it. But that's more Sam's. Sam can tell me, no, we've got it covered.
How about it, Sam?
We got it covered. No, I mean, it's no secret that there's, some variability issues with renewable sources, wind and solar. But I think something that gets lost in the conversation is, a coal plant or even a natural gas plant, it's not flipping on a switch, right? Those plants take a lot of time to get going. It's part of the, it's just part of the issues that we saw in Texas is you can't just say, okay, power plant number one, you go now. So I think, having more wind and solar on a grid actually helps us more with grid management and with capacity issues as well. So, I think that variability, if anything, I used to be a meteorologist, so I know that we can predict when it's going to be sunny, when it's going to be windy, and we know when those resources can turn on. It's the other ones sometimes that, we have to, that actually take a little bit longer in terms of actual time to spin up. So I think, this is something that we should look at from like a grid management perspective, and maybe use solar and wind more to our strengths than to our weaknesses.
Great. Zach, how about you?
Yeah, I think probably the challenge is trying to do it all, make this transition just going way too fast. I mean, I want to build as much new wind and solar, but we as a company don't want to have an over-reliance on any resource versus another one. So I think it's got to be just a very measured transition. You can't do it all overnight with just wind and solar. I think Thomas mentioned in the chat, it's solar's great, but you've got a lot of cloudy days and you got night to deal with. It's not always windy, but we can forecast that, as Sam mentioned too, and we can plan for that. But you can't just go too fast and then put yourself in a bad spot years from now, because you've maybe gone too fast. And we have to balance affordable rates too. We don't want to increase rates too fast, but adding more renewables in the right places at the right time can give customers, make Wisconsin an attractive place to come. Better power quality, greater energy cost certainty, because we don't have as many variable fuel costs. There's just helping them to achieve their goals. There's a lot of good opportunities too. It's just got to be kind of a balanced and a measured approach. Can't happen overnight.
Great. I know there was another question asked in the chat with RICE facilities being able to power up in less than 5 minutes. Is there a technology that's seen as more beneficial or as a backup to wind and solar? I know you touched on a couple, Sam or Zach.
I was going to ask, was that about reciprocating engines, smaller reciprocating engines?
Yeah, I apologize. I don't know that acronym either.
All right.
If that's what if that was what it's about, those could be a great opportunity. A lot of times can be fueled on different fuel types. Gas, for example, smaller. You can use them in conjunction with renewables. I think they should be a bigger part of our future. Very efficient, fast starting, cleaner. So really good opportunity if you are talking about reciprocating engines, which it is. So Dan, I'd love to talk with you more about that. I think you're spot on. So
great.
A couple of you mentioned batteries, right? So the battery storage supply needs to kind of keep up with the renewable generation, I would think, from a grid management perspective. But we are seeing more and more of our facilities switching from diesel generation, backup generation to battery backup. And part of it is that if you want to have enough diesel generators to power a 100 megawatt data center, you need a very large air permit. You have to go through the EPA, and it's difficult. Plus, it's not that sustainable and doesn't really fit with their company guidelines. Whereas as batteries also come down drastically in price and more are being produced in the United States, that those are going to become great to back up some of these systems and the grid overall.
Well, I think this is a perfect segue for this kind of overarching question about folks in real estate and what do they need to know about engaging in this arena? Where do they start and what tools should they be looking at as they make these considerations? Because all of you have said in very similar fashion that this doesn't happen overnight, that this takes a while. Can you maybe give us a sense for that? Maybe some of the resources that you would point to?
Well, I guess I'll start because I'm in a real estate company. I mean, the thing that I realized is that I spend a lot of my time networking with utilities. I go to utility conferences now. I speak at utility conferences on Zoom. So I spend a lot of my time with utility people in economic development or engineers working for utilities that it just wasn't an area I had to get familiar with before. Now I do. So it's, meeting those people like Zach and Sam and Coleman. If this comes up, to know who to call.
Now, is this a specialty or a niche for you, or is this something that's, a lot of folks in real estate are in this space?
Well, it's probably more of my time than most, but any project these days, this issue could come up. So just, it's not like you have to master it. You just have to know who to call and who your resources are, who your local utility, what utility serves the site you're dealing with, and then who the contacts are with that utility.
Great. Sam, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree. There's only so much I can do. I can direct people to certain places too. But yeah, honestly, a lot of times I just direct them to Zach or, depending on which utility serves them. Sometimes that's a quicker conversation because, when you start getting into those larger projects that Ken talked about, it requires, there's more layers to the onion.
And Zach, it sounds like you're kind of the focus here, the first point of contact. Can you also add in or layer in kind of some of the things that you're asking clients to be looking at or considering as they're making these decisions?
Yeah, usually what I really try to drill down into the first kind of meeting is what are your sustainability goals? What are your energy objectives? What do you want to actually accomplish? Because we do have a number of different products and service now we can offer those customers, but if they're not quite sure, that can be something that we can spend a little bit of time on, is really narrowing those down to make sure we're putting the right solution forward that's going to help achieve those. And that sometimes takes a little bit longer than you think, because there are a lot of options out there and different ways to go about tackling different energy options, objectives that each individual customer has. I'd say one thing that's just kind of changed too over probably the last couple of years is, rather than the utility not probably collaborating and coordinating with other solar developers that want to reach out to customers and provide kind of private generations, is I'm more than happy to do that. If we don't have a solution or option that can meet a customer's need or help bring in another prospective customer, I know have a really good sense of which developers are really providing quality materials and equipment and sound proposals, and so I'll direct them to a number of different developers to help them make sure they get what they want, which is a little bit of a change in the past, because that private generation can take away sales from us. Not a great thing, but it's more about the utility these days actually giving the customer what they want rather than just powering the bill. I know that's probably hard to believe, but that's where we're heading.
No, I think that's great insight. So in other words, they can call any one of you. You're all going to tell them to call Zach. So final question, and we'll just go around the horn. I know we covered a lot of ground with not only the importance, but where we are, how to get engaged. We also talked a lot about a lot of different types of energy sources. 5-10 years down the road, do we achieve those goals? Are we on our way to achieving those goals? And really, what's the next chapter in this conversation? I'm going to go Ken, Zach, Sam.
Oh man, I'm the last one to answer this question, but yeah, I mean, I think this is just going to continue to grow from our standpoint. The percentage of projects that are worried about this issue has just grown incredibly. Unless something happens to reverse that trend, and it's not just renewable energies; it's also diversity and all kinds of issues that have come up in the last few years. But these are, I expect this all to continue, and us as site selectors have to have all the answers for them on where to go and how they can service their facilities with renewable energy and everything else.
Great, Zach.
Like what's next? These are always the fun questions. Well, you're going to hear folks are going to hear a lot about batteries, because pairing those with wind and solar, that's kind of seen as the holy grail to make sure we have power at night, cloudy days, etc. But I think one of the emerging trends you'll hear is just more focus on the supply chain, where those rare earth minerals are coming from for batteries. A lot of that's in China. China controls 8% of the supply chain when it comes to those rare earth metals, between the lithium and cobalt and graphite. And I think that's going to be a growing concern, because as we start doing more batteries for our power sector, we're also doing batterying up our transportation sector, and that could be troubling. And I think you'll hear more and more about that. I think you could potentially see more of a focus investments in the actual hydrogen production. I know that sounds wild, but 7 years ago, I brought a futurist in with my board of directors, and he was all about hydrogen. And I think you're starting to see a lot of global investments right now in hydrogen. It could be paired, Sam, you mentioned, with biofuels here, and how that's maybe a future competitive source of energy too for us here. So I think going to be on the lookout maybe on hydrogen, biofuels, those sort of things, because that's really how we're going to be able to meet, I think, our overall clean energy goals long term. It won't always be on the backs of wind and solar. It's going to have to come from other technologies like that.
Great, Sam, bring it home.
Yeah, I mean, this is the question I get most often, right? Like, what's the shiny new object that we should be reaching for? And, whether that's hydrogen, whether that's batteries, microgrids, I feel like something new gets added to the list every day. But, it's really important to recognize the fact that we have the tools right now to implement this. We have wind, we have solar, we have hydro, geothermal, all sorts of other things. But we just need to scale them up, right? Like, the answer is there. We just need to, reinforce it with our full might. And I think I think it was Zach brought up a really important point too. We need to have a diverse energy portfolio. We don't want to have just solar. We don't want to have just wind, because as we've seen, you know, those resources can go down. And if we spread out our resources, not just in types, but in locations too on the grid, we're going to not only bring down prices, but we're going to make for a much smoother and much more reliable transition to renewable energy, which I think is going to happen. I'm the eternal optimist, so I'm going to cross my fingers and keep doing what I'm doing. But yeah, I think we're going to get there.
Great. Well, thank you all for sharing your expertise. Special thanks to Coleman Pfeiffer, who from Alliant Energy, who really helped coordinate all this and bring us all together. Guys, we spent a couple hours preparing for this. I think it was a really valuable conversation. Zach Hill, Ken Maly, Sam Dunaiski, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, for all the great questions we got here. Again, this presentation will be shared and the contact information will be shared as well. So have a great day, everyone, and thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank
Great
you.
job.